So at this point, I'm going to ask, actually, we'll have everyone turn off their cameras except for Harlene and myself. And then Jakub, you will be up first. Awesome. Got it, Marlene? Okay. Okay, ready, Harlene? Let's go.
I'm ready. So welcome, everyone. I'm welcoming you on behalf of myself, Harlene Anderson, and Diane Gehart. And we wanted to begin with telling you how this book happened. One day I got a surprise inquiry from an editor at Routledge wanting to know if we would do a revised edition or a second edition of collaborative therapy. And I just responded gracefully, thank you very much for the invitation. I'll talk with Diane and we'll get back with you as soon as we can. So what I was thinking was that I did not want to do another book on therapy because I was thinking about the importance of the application of the ideas and the practice to disciplines and contexts outside of therapy. So I contacted Diane and I told her about the invitation and about my reservation and why. And because ever since collaborative therapy came out, people began to ask, well, how do we do this if we don't work in therapy? And so I thought it was important to address that audience. And that question really has a long history dating back to how I got involved in this part of my career, is that in the early 70s, I joined a family therapy seminar. My original training had been in traditional psychology. And in the family therapy seminar, I just happened to join a group of very irreverent people. It was Harry Galician and his team of colleagues who had been challenging traditional mental health practices since the 1950s. So I was influenced from the very beginning by the team's increasing discomfort with the limits of paradigms and reductive theories viewed as colonizing assumptions these days of cause and cure. What seemed to be missing was, as Diane writes a lot about, was the human factor. So briefly, let me just highlight 4 important things about the human factor. That human living is contextual, that each person's situation is unique, that it's important to have respect for the wisdom and knowledge that the people we work with have about their own lives, and that we are not the experts on other people's lives. 3, the importance of local knowledge, meaning the client's expertise as the best resource in the room for all of us to talk about and draw from. And 4, the risk of generalizations, that when we begin to categorize or group people and problems or label them, that we're end up focusing on the label, the category as the target of treatment, and we really miss the person sitting in front of us. So in sum, as John Schotter would say, and Lynn Hoffman would say, we're talking about a witness therapy. With is the important word, a witness practice, whether it's therapy or education or climate change, research, working in organizations, working in communities. And with a witness practice, what we ended up with was the whole idea of being conversational partners. In other words, the person who's the professional is a conversational partner and with their clients, whomever they may be, whether they are members of a work team, members of a board of directors, or students in a classroom. But that we want to invite them to join us in looking into and exploring and talking about in various ways what they are here for, and to be able to follow their talking as they are doing it. In other words, not having predetermined ideas about how a story should be told, but that each person will tell a story in a different way, in their own unique way, and that it's up to us to be able to follow that and to bend in ways that fit with what they are doing rather than having them bend to fit with us. So I begin to use a lot of metaphors in my teaching and training and writing. And one that most of you or some of you might be familiar with is the metaphor of host and guest. That is the professional, we are always both the host and the guest. We are a guest in other people's lives for just that quick in their whole life, and that it's very presumptuous to think that we know them ahead of time by their last name, their geographical location, by what they are, the referral sources. That is the problem. That it's very important to learn from your guest. So we're hosting and we're also a guest, and they are hosting us in their life. And that's a very humbling place to be when someone lets you into their life, whether that's the life of their classroom, their school, their research center, or their therapy room. So I'm going to pause here, Diane, and give you a chance to say something about your chapter. I have the first two chapters in the book. The first one is on the conceptual framework, it's on dialogue. And the second one is on the practice itself, what I call the philosophical stance, and the 7 characteristics that I currently identify as the characteristics or elements of the philosophical stance. I'll just say one more thing about the notion of witness and the client as the expert. And that is, I was visiting an Aboriginal art exhibit here at a museum in Houston. And there was one particular painting that really caught my attention. And it was by an Aboriginal artist named Mike Williams. And he had drawn on a Australian post office delivery bag, a big canvas bag. And the words that he had put was, "Your maps not needed." And I just took multiple photographs of that because I thought that is so important. Our professional maps are not needed by the people we work with. What we need is to learn more about their maps and to be able to follow them on the various paths in their maps. So Diane, once again, we'll turn it over to you.
Oh, well, thank you, Harlene, for that incredible introduction. And I just want to welcome everyone today and to remind you, as you've probably seen in the chat, that if you prefer to get a Spanish or Chinese translation, all you need to do is go down to the little globe on your Zoom bar and click Chinese or Spanish, and you will get a simultaneous translation. And many thanks to our translators today for making this possible. And also, if you prefer, there is a live transcript and you can click the CC at the bottom of your screen. Well, Harlene, this is just so exciting. It is day 2 of our webinar about the launch of our book, Collaborative-Dialogic Practice. And we are just so thrilled to have contributors from around the globe here with us today. And I think we should go ahead and get started. And basically, folks, we'll be spending about 15 minutes with authors for the various chapters in our book. And then we will be having questions for all the chapters at the end of today's webinar is the structure. So, oh, and actually, you know what? The audience didn't get a chance to introduce themselves. So if you get a chance, please go into your chat and just let us know where in the world you are logging in from. So you can go ahead and just let us know. It's always fun to see who is here with us today.
Absolutely.
All right, Vienna, Austria, Portland, Oregon, Malta, Mexico, another one from Vienna, Cruzcote, hello.
Serbia earlier.
Yeah, Houston, Southern California, Massachusetts, Argentina, Mexico, Northridge, one of my students, Kenya, probably another one of my students there, England, Romania, Wisconsin, Madrid, Texas, LA, hello. Spain, I can't read them coming in so fast if I skipped you. It's just like
Slovenia, South Africa.
Chile, awesome. Texas, Puebla, Canada, wonderful. Nairobi, probably another one of my students there. Massachusetts. Oh, hola and welcome everyone. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And I know it goes on and it's incredible. The entire world is here. It is just lovely. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and start with our team from the Czech Republic. Jakub, Lucia, and Martin, welcome, welcome. I know it's getting evening over there.
Hi, Diane and Harlene. Thank you for the introduction. We would like to introduce our chapter that we work on together. We are part of a narrative group from Czech Republic, which is a group that work collaborative and dialogical with collaborative and dialogical practices and promotes it for more than 10 years, I guess. And in the chapter, we drew on our experience of working with climate justice collectives. We all work as psychotherapists and have been involved in social activism. And most recently, we are trying to support activists and collectives while using art therapy and facilitation experience. And the climate justice movement that we work with is a decentralized global network of individuals and collectives that respond to challenges of climate crisis with respect to principles of social justice. And as collaborative and dialogical practitioners, we realize that this climate justice movement shares some important values with our practice. For instance, the value of decentralizing power or non-hierarchy reminds the concept of non-expert position from CD practice, or the value of radical democracy articulated by most collective is very close to the concept of dialogical space, and so on.
And in this chapter, we suggest that collaborative dialogical facilitation of some processes can help collectives to follow these values and principles and overcome emerging dilemmas related to social change struggles. In the text, we give an example of such a dilemma present in one of the meetings that we facilitated, and it is a tension between speeding up social change and slowing down to align the action with the principles of practice in the individual society, or so-called prefiguration. This means to care for relationships and create space for reflection as a way of overcoming so-called business as usual. In collective's everyday life, this dilemma can result in frustration, tiredness, and exhaustion, and brings many involved to the edge of the burnout.
In our view, it is possible to approach this dilemma by involving reflecting processes. Creating space for embodied reflection allows collectives not to get stuck in habitual cycles of being in relationships and being in action. Therefore, it allows us to stay in touch with tensions between the need for change and prefiguration of an ideal world. Thus, it is possible for a collective to be more present in decision-making, to foster mutual relationships, and to deepen its long-term sustainability.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. And there we go. That was your abstract, correct?
Yes.
Awesome.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. And I have to say, when Harlene and I were looking at who to invite, she said, "What do you think about a chapter on, climate justice?" I'm like, that would be amazing. So I just think it is just so incredible that you all put these ideas together, because I don't know anyone else quite doing this work. Do you, Harlene?
No, but I think it's so timely, particularly the importance of helping people who are actively promoting social justice and things like climate change to keep in mind the audience that they are trying to gather the attention of and to influence. The importance of how one begins and tries to do that. And I think that's what your chapter beautifully illustrates, how you consulted with the climate activist group themselves and the shifts and differences that they began to make.
And you all are doing some groundbreaking work. You've got the whole world here listening. Do you have any things, nuggets of wisdom that you would like to share with doing this type of work? Because I think people around the world, in the United States, we talked a lot about climate anxiety, and I don't know if you would have just anything. We talk about treating that in our youth in particular, our youth and the young adults. So I just thought maybe you would like to share some thoughts, as I would say, thought leaders in this area.
So we would like to say something.
Yeah, I seem like I want to say something, so I will. So yeah, I think it was the last presentation that we had on the conference with Cuba, where we dealt a lot with how activism and being part of social change or a change in terms of the challenging climate change might have also very beneficial effects on our mental health or social psychological well-being. And we really find this super important in our work to not only see activism as something very challenging and potentially exhausting, but also as something very nourishing and very important in our lives to kind of overcome these challenges of today's world, to gather together and reconnect to the togetherness that we all miss in this world to fight.
We also refer to the work of Joanna Macy, which is a deep ecologist, which used the concept of active hope, which means like actively approaching those very disturbing topics like climate change by trying to transform like our relating to the others, but also the politics and our context. And in our article, we are trying somehow to tackle these tensions which can emerge while trying to change the politics, to make the social change, but also to stick to some values in changing our relationships and changing our way how we are behaving to each other. So this is basically like the main dilemma and main topic of the article. Sorry. Yeah.
Yes, I think you do that beautiful in your chapter, because you talk about you're fighting for justice and climate justice, and that reflecting on we need to have justice within our own group as well, in terms of having everyone's voice heard. And so that the process of the activist collective or community is reflecting the same values that you're advocating for in terms of the climate and the welfare of humanity, really, I think is a fair way to frame some of that.
Yeah.
And I think what's important, Diane, for people to know about their chapter is that all three of the authors, and particularly Jakub, started out as activists themselves. And Jakub, when you said young adults, I would say you started as a very young adult based on my knowledge of your participation. And I remember meeting Jakub in the Czech Republic, driving around in what one might call a hippie van.
We still do that.
Yeah, we still do that, actually. Yeah,
we actually just
That was
returned
your
from a van trip.
You started out on the streets yourself.
Yeah. It's a street worker.
Experience to another level, so to speak.
Yeah. it's actually all the time the way how we are trying to be inspired by our professional identities in activism and other way around, like how the activism can inspire our work in more like professional circles. So it's also all the time this this topic for us, I guess. Yeah, how we can use those approaches, because I think that what we have found while writing the chapter was that the collaborative dialogical practice has actually very similar values and some kind of like philosophical stance as climate justice collectives, and that we can actually use and collaborative dialogical practice to support those collectives in following their values and promoting the social change. So I think this is quite unique. Yeah.
Well, and I think you all have also touched on the importance of hope in the discourses around climate. And I think Lucia also, she talked about, she didn't use this word, but she talked about how having a sense of agency would be, I think the term Harlene would have, has been an important part of, you know, taking care of kind of the mental health of folks who are climate activists. And I think that the concept of agency and hope, I don't know if you could just even give an example or say a little bit more about that, because I think from a lot of discourses I hear in the United States, those two concepts aren't always highlighted. And I think it is, I think there's a mental health benefit in seeing agency and hope related to climate change and climate justice.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think they're completely intertwined together, because if there's no hope, there's no reason to take agency or to invite agency in our lives. So I think that's very, very important part of it. And yeah, you're right that this agency is something that can keep us going on and have this sense of we are actually powerful and we can contribute to changing things, not maybe changing individually, but collectively. We have a great power that we need to be able to use.
Also, maybe I would like to stress the sense of agency, not only towards the world situation and the climate crisis, but also towards our own groups and collectives. Because often we meet people who are coming through burnout from activism, who experienced trauma, for instance, connected to the police violence, etc. And quite often we meet people from these groups who hesitate to seek professional help within the mental health care system. And one of the things that are important for our work and our engagement with activist groups and collectives is to build ways to provide mutual care within the groups instead of the institutionalized and professionalized spaces where psychotherapy and other types of care can be offered. So it's also another level which I find important for our work to help groups and collectives create spaces for the mutual care without the need for professional mental health workers.
Yeah, and we have a group from Brazil who's doing, it's a different type of community work, but a similar concept of, rather than just send everyone out to therapists, at least in the US, there's a shortage of, mental health professionals. to create that within the organization itself. And even the group from China that we'll be hearing from briefly, they've done that in an organizational work context. And I think your chapter actually does a beautiful job, I think, illustrating that. Just got a minute or two left here. Harlene, you want to wrap up?
Well, I was going to say that I noticed in the chat, Arlene made a comment about relational agency, and that's what the Czech group is referring to or talking about. And I think that fits with the notion of agency, the notion of care, of helping those people who are the activists take care of not only the climate, but of themselves. So thank you, each of you, very, very much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And we really appreciate your patience with us in writing your chapter.
Yeah, helping to edit it. And I do just have to say, the world is remarkably small. Because my father grew up in a tiny little village called Swingendorf in Austria. And I mean, I think there are 300 people, homes total there, little farming village. And it is literally, I just think 20 miles, I guess you guys do kilometers. It is not far from where you're at. So my Aunt Helly every day has an open yowza. You can come over for coffee and cake. She's awesome. And she's always just welcoming visitors. But yeah, I hope next time I get to Austria, I hope to visit. But that was just amazing. Your town is Brno, yeah, it's right across the border from where my aunt, and I almost got arrested on that border going for a walk in the vineyards there because I wanted to take a picture, and apparently the gendarmerie on the Czech side saw me. I almost did.
Wow.
It was just wonderful to connect with you and to read about your work. And
Thank you so much for inviting us in this.
Thank you, each of you, Jakub, Lucia, and Martine.
Yes, and have a lovely evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so Sheila's going to tell us about her exciting ideas and work.
Absolutely. Hello.
Hi, so nice to be here with you. And I just want to say to Jakub, Lucia, and Martine that I'm inspired by your work. This idea of taking on these larger issues is so critical right now. And so it's fantastic. I can't wait to read the chapter.
Awesome. Well, so go ahead, Sheila. Why don't you go ahead and tell us about your chapter?
Yeah, sure. So my chapter is focused on collaborative and dialogic practices in education. And so, today's prevailing educational practices were designed for an entirely different world, a world that has been dominated by industrialization. And they're practices that focus on following instructions, memorizing information, displaying independent thinking, if you will. But at the same time, we live now in a world where the emphasis is on innovation, thinking outside of the box, learning through action, and collaboration are all requisite skills for success. So in my chapter, I describe a number of educational practices that meet the contemporary demands of innovation, action, and collaboration within, and for me this is critical, within a traditional educational system. In other words, educational practices that disrupt the tradition while simultaneously finding a way to meet the demands of that tradition, traditions such as grading and institutional requirements that are frankly outdated right now. So I offer a view of how dialogic and collaborative practices can be used within a traditional educational system. And since the majority of educational contexts adhere to this outdated tradition of education, I hope that my chapter can serve as some kind of resource for those who are frustrated by the rigid rules and expectations of educational institutions by offering innovative practices that simultaneously appear. I love that notion of appearing to meet those traditional standards. Nothing has persuaded educators, administrators, learners, and families more effectively that our system of education is outdated and minimally successful and in dire need of significant transformation than the global pandemic introduced by COVID-19. In the early months of 2020, entire countries moved education online, and with this necessary move, the cracks in the educational system became glaringly obvious. I mean, many of us knew they were there all along, but now they were just right front and center. Those cracks range from outdated forms of educational delivery, outdated content, outdated structure, to the disenfranchisement of particular populations. As education moved online during the pandemic, those without access to online resources were left behind. Parents and guardians who were unable to monitor and support their children's now homeschooling, so to speak, found themselves trapped in a dilemma, pitting economic survival against their children's education. Originally, education was a privilege available only to the wealthy and the well-connected. The idea of public education available to all and then eventually required of all is a relatively new idea. And because it's available to all, many assume there is equal opportunity in public education. But the global pandemic demonstrated that this is not the case, a situation of which many of us were already well aware. Now, I've just spoken a bit about the pandemic and how that's sort of shown the ugly scars of our educational system globally, I would say. But I want to note that I proposed my chapter long before the pandemic appeared in our lives. Mm-hmm. And the arguments that I make about education and the need for a deep commitment to collaboration and significant transformation of how we educate have been dramatically supported by this virus. So in the chapter, I take up those issues of how we can use collaborative and dialogic practices, again, to work within a system that's outdated and flawed, and yet not get ourselves in trouble, so to speak. A form of undercover activism, I suppose.
Sheila, if I may make a comment, I want to go back to your opening lines. And that's what I find very impressive and that just jumps out at me in this chapter and all of your writings, is that you really talk about how to be different within the mainstream. That is so important, regardless of whether your discipline is education or research or therapy, etc., is that how you can be different yourself, how you can perform the difference, act the difference. You don't have to be necessarily evangelical. You don't have to be a missionary of something new and different that you're trying to sell or give to somebody else. You just do it, you act it, you live it. And that's what I love about your work.
Thanks, Harlene. I really appreciate that comment, and you touch on something near and dear to my heart, because I think of myself as an activist, but I feel like when you're going against the grain, it's hard work. So how do you go against the grain while appearing to be within the grain, so to speak? And I think that that's where the greatest power is, to appear to be following the rules, but in just these subtle ways, disturbing them and inviting others into because what's critical in that moment is that you realize that what you do matters, that is what creates possibilities, potentials, and constraints. And so it's no longer, oh, they're making me do this. It's more, oh, look, when I kind of twist this rule a little bit, something new emerges and opens up, and I'm part of creating that with others. So yeah, I think it's important.
The idea of little bit, just a little, is so important, so that it's not so disruptive to the other person or people, that they are able to hopefully be a little bit curious about what you're doing differently.
Yeah. And I think that that's important because, you know, you have to, from my perspective, you have to respect what other people value. And so there are a lot of educators, if we just keep it in the context of education here, who really value these traditions, you know, of, you know, the expert teacher in the front of the classroom, you know, kind of, you know, delivering all the information to the learners and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And to simply, you know, say that's a terrible way of operating, you know, that doesn't show respect for what people really believe in. So if I show respect for a tradition that I think is flawed, I'm more likely to get, as you just mentioned, the curiosity from the other. Oh, you have a different way of thinking about this. I'd like to know about it, instead of trying to force and persuade the other. Yeah.
And could you just give some examples? Because I'm sure there are lots of educators. I'm one of them. Your work has inspired me for my 25 years of being a higher ed educator, but maybe just some examples of simple ways to introduce these ideas into classrooms.
Well, you know, it's actually extremely simple and might sound quite naive, but isn't it odd that we enter in on the first day of a class, let's say, you know, of a semester, of a year of education, we enter in as if like, okay, this is what this class is about, and this is what we're going to do, and here's how we're going to do it, and we just start talking right about it. Rather than try to create a sense of community, a sense of togetherness, a sense of relationality, and creating the possibility for people to get to know one another, to get to situate themselves in this very particular context, and also to have a say in how the whole process of education for whatever period, is it a semester, is it a month, is it a year, you know, is going to unfold. So my own commitment always is to pause getting into content and to spend as much time as necessary to try to create that sort of community. And so one of the things that I do is ask everyone to kind of talk with each other and think about what are some guidelines and ways of being that they would appreciate, that they think would help them learn and be engaged instead of tuning out and being bored. Like what keeps them lively and engaged in anything, any activity. And so, you know, each group will come up with different things, but there are some common themes that always come up, which is things like respect each other, get to know one another, spend some time with each other outside of class. And they come up with lists, lots of things to do. No question is a stupid question. If there's someone who's not talking, all of us should try to invite them in, instead of just it be the teacher's job. So things like that. I also invite students, like, is this classroom a good place for us to meet? Should we go someplace else? You know, and I've had students say, come to my apartment. And if that's a comfortable place to meet, then, you know, it's relationships first. And once you have those relations, the learning is really easy and people become really engaged in it. So that's one. Another is, you know, for me, Diane, I don't think you're in this category, but the technology aspect, you know, like I don't really know anything about technology. So I let the students teach me what would help them. You know, what do they know about how we can use technology to create more of this sense of community amongst ourselves? And they then are the experts. And so they're just ways of kind of creating our relations in the very beginning that really invite them in to be active participants in education. Those are just a couple of things. Yeah.
That's perfect. I absolutely love it. And, you know, along those lines, I'll just throw this out. One of the things I've found helpful over the years is I just always ask them, I have to admit, before we get into a syllabus or anything, I just want to know you as a person. So tell me one unexpected thing about yourself. And I start all of my classes this way because I meet them as humans first. And I think, yeah, this relationship piece really is missing.
It
Really
really
is missing from so much of our education systems.
Yeah.
And I say K through, I don't know, 22. What's a doctorate? How many years is that? But across
50 for some. Yeah.
yeah, across the whole spectrum, definitely K through 16.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. And that first part of introducing yourselves, I give a little speech about myself and I tell them, I used to say, well, you'll probably think I'm kind of crazy because I love this stuff that we're going to be talking about this semester. I read it in the bathtub. I read it on the beach. I read it on my boat. I just love this stuff. And you probably are going to think I'm crazy because of that. But that's not really why I'm crazy. I'm probably crazy because I think you're going to love it too. And then, so it just kind of,
Yep.
it's the beginning of trying to create a different kind of relationship with them instead of professor to student, and to have them see me as a person first and foremost. I mean, if they can picture, maybe they shouldn't picture me in the bathtub, or on the beach, but I don't know.
No, it makes you human though. It brings you humanity. We just have a couple minutes here, Harlene. You want to?
I was going to highlight the idea of the relationship because I think that is so important. And how, as you said, how to create a relationship which is not congruent with what they expected.
Yeah.
You're going to meet a different professor, a different principal of the school, a different teacher in the classroom than they expected. And that for one. And then for two, the idea of spending time with each other when possible, how to make that happen outside of your everyday context, whether that's a classroom, a boardroom, etc. But a different context, a different environment. And people are different. Different parts of context call forth different parts of ourselves. I mean, we're always basically the same person, kind of, so to speak. But there's so many aspects of us that we can have the opportunity, if we provide it for ourselves, to show and to experience, and to allow us to experience the other is different.
Yeah. Yeah. And, how do you create the conditions where students are so used to, just there's a canonical way of being a student. You sign up for a course, you step into the course. You're not really engaged. You might be engaged in some way with the material or so forth, and maybe you have a couple of friends, or you meet a couple of people, or you like that professor or that teacher. But really, like, how do we humanize education and make it something exciting rather than just this routine, and bring it home to people? And I think that really requires this collaborative approach, that we're in this together, and we could bore each other to tears for X amount of weeks, or we could really have some fun. And I feel like I'm lucky because my discipline is human communication, and so it's relevant to everybody. But I think if you were teaching mathematics, you could do the same thing. I think it's unfortunate we have such a outdated form of learning globally, because there's so many alternatives available.
Yes, and I just so appreciate your work. And I think I've loved this conversation because it just highlights how it's bringing both the instructor and the students in to humanize that relationship from both sides. Even the instructor has to share their embarrassing stories. I've got mine too. You should see how I got into this profession. I'm the poster child for career counseling. But bringing that human element, I keep calling these conversations humanizing conversations, and I think your work just really highlights how important that is in the educational realm.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sheila, for so much for being with us today
you.
and for sharing your incredible work. I know it has inspired, I think, generations of educators, and I'm really excited how it will inspire the next generation.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you again, Sheila.
Thanks for including me in this great project.
Thanks for accepting
Thank
our invitation.
Okay.
And so our next two are Sylvia and Richard, who are also going to talk to us more about, is it K through 12? I forget your academy. We were talking.
3rd through 12th, yes.
Pardon, what was it?
3rd through 12th grade right now.
3rd through 12. Okay. 3rd through 12. So we have two chapters on education in this book, and because it is such an important topic, as Sheila just told us. And so we just love Sylvia and Richard for the two of you to just tell us a little bit about your chapter.
Well, I want to start, first of all, thanking Sheila for setting the stage for what Sylvia and I are going to speak about, because she brought to the forefront for me, our chapter is really about Xavier Academy and our attempt to be one of those transformational programs in schools that are putting so much of what she talked about into practice. I was thinking about so many of the words that I've heard from Harlene and the rest of the collaborative community, words such as being comfortable with uncertainty, trust the process, a relational approach, right? And in our chapter, one of our goals was to bring these ideas to life, to show what does it look like in a school setting. And in bringing that forth, it also became sort of a personal story, because as the founder and leader of Xavier Academy, it was how do we invite others into this conversation and into this experience, and also I think one of the other concepts that I wish I had spoken a little bit more about is the complexity of bringing these ideas into a school setting, into something that is very traditional, and the challenges that come with that. Sylvia, what comes up for you?
Something that was important for me to share is that, unlike Sheila, even though we conceptualized the chapter before, we changed it like 7 times before we started to write. And we ended up writing it in the middle of the pandemic. So what made sense for us was to look at what were the actual things that were happening as you were tackling what was going on in the pandemic, and how you were using collaborative ideas in each step of the way. But you were doing it as we were writing it. So that was an incredible experience, because we were reflecting upon something that was happening as you were doing it. And also the way we wrote it, that was really interesting, because we would talk about what you were doing, we will think together about what was the next step you were going to do, and then in the way we ended up writing it, you are the actor and I am the reflector, even though we thought about all of this together. And there are very particular issues that Sheila mentioned that are very present in what we bring in the chapter, which is this whole notion of embracing uncertainty that sounds very romantic, but when you were dealing with it, as you were trying to keep your students, your teachers, your parents, and even the financial piece of the school going on, uncertainty is no fun. And so what's really interesting for me in this chapter is that it's hands-on, it's very practical, and it narrates, reflects on an experience. So I think that for the reader, this chapter is an active experience of how collaborative practices can really create a community and sustain a community, which is what you were able to do during the pandemic.
Thank you. Wonderful. And Sylvia, can you turn up your microphone in any way? Is that possible?
Maybe I can move closer. Is that better?
That's a little better.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Gonna put us, awesome. Thank you though, both for that introduction to your work.
And I was thinking of when Sheila was talking about creating relationships among the students and between the students and herself, that for me, an important focus in Sylvia and Richard's chapter is developing relationships with parents and having parents have a different sense of, a different idea of the school, I think was an important part of the outcome.
Absolutely. And I mean, I will just share, I was the mother of a 1st and 4th grader during the pandemic, as well as the program coordinator for a master's marriage family therapy with 30 faculty and 200 students. So your chapter touched on a lot of my experience. But what I really loved in this chapter is how Richard, you were calling parents one-on-one through this process. Is that correct? Am I remembering?
Yes. And that was a learning experience to my first phone call. I remember Diane, I thought it was going to be a 5-10 minute conversation, and it lasted an hour, right? Just using a lot of the guiding principles that the collaborative practices talks about, just seeing where the conversation would lead to. And the second phone call was just as long. And then when I realized, oh my gosh, it's 150 phone calls that are going to take this long. So it was a 2-week process of just being on the phone.
Wow, I totally believe it. I believe it. But I bet it really transformed the relationships to really help everyone get through this.
Yes, not only that relationship, just the amount of information that I was receiving on a daily basis about things that we were doing well, things that we needed to shift or change. And then at the same time, I think the beauty behind that is also it gave me a lot of positive meaning to feel as part of that process. So it helped me with the self-care piece that then allowed me as a leader to help others. Right. So it was a mutually beneficial relationship in making those phone calls.
Wow. And I'm guessing as someone who is having to, I mean, you're working with Sylvia making these decisions, but like you have a pulse now on where people really are at. I'm guessing that was the piece that was so, in some ways, made your job easier, even though it sounded like 150 hours on the phone doesn't sound easy, but knowing where people are at and having that relationship to work through those challenges.
Sure. And then that informed some of our practices moving forward. So today, at the beginning and even at the end of the school year, we attempt to have these kinds of meetings with our families. So we allow for 1 hour for a team to meet with the families to check in with them, to make plans for the following year and so forth. So also one of the things that became apparent was that time we spent together is very valuable. And as a school, how do we make time for that when we have so much on our plates? So it has to be a conscious decision. It has to be something that we value and put into practice.
But it's not only what's really fascinating for me, and at the same time extremely challenging, is the ideas sound really great, but having the time and making the commitment to really tackle them goes against a grain of a society that wants everything to be fast and quick. So I think the challenge that Sheila was talking about, it's not only philosophical, it's also in the practicalities of putting it in practice is much more difficult because it requires a lot of time in a society that's not willing to put time into relationships. So I think what we learn by doing this is that there's no short or cheap way to do this. You have to really be there and invest your time and yourself into making this happen. Otherwise, it's going to sound very nice, but you're not going to develop the kind of relationships and invest yourself as a person, as a leader, as an owner, and as an educator, as Richard did, which is not an easy task in terms of making it possible, because otherwise you're not walking your talk.
And Sylvia, one of the things
Yeah,
that
it's not only in the beginning, but you have to continually nurture those relationships that you've developed. You can't just ride on the initial development. But, and then also Richard used the word value, and I think that's important. And what you were also highlighting, Sylvia, that you're putting a value into practice. So it's for you, it's important.
And one of the things that comes up, Sylvia, with what you just said, I feel like we're lucky at Xavier in that we have a lot of people who are committed to this philosophical stance and to this ways of being. And even in a community that shares many of these values, the challenges that we face every time we invite someone else into our community, I question how often I make people uncomfortable with some of the requests. You know, I'll give you an example. Starting the school year, what Sheila brought this forth. I asked my teachers to, the first week of school, forget about academics, get to know the kids, spend time with them, have conversations, play games, do whatever it takes. And yet that makes many of my teachers so uncomfortable, right? How do I do that? You know, and part of what I ended up doing, I do 2 to 3 weeks of in-service when we just sit around and have conversation for 2 or 3 hours at a time in an effort to model that for them. And despite all that, they're still uncomfortable, right? And how do we provide those tools and how do we help them with that challenge? Because all the messages they keep getting from, whether sometimes it's parents, even the kids themselves, or anyone outside of this community, is curriculum, you know, grades, knowledge. These are all so important. And we're saying, wait, but let's pause, because if we can connect and form strong bonds and relationships, then all these other things will fall into place so much faster.
And Richard, this reminds me, a few weeks ago, I was having conversations with the students and the teachers at Xavier. And one of the things that came up was how uncertainty is experienced as lack of clarity. And I think that's another huge issue that we need to talk about in terms of the expectations of what a school system is, what people go to school for, and how can you put together in a way that makes sense for everybody, because otherwise it's very difficult to continue the process, because this notion between the traditional and the innovation, as Sheila was talking about, and how can you keep the relationship and the tension of the relationship between the tradition and the innovation. And I think that's the challenge we are facing every day.
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And can be a real challenge for some folks to not see education the way they expect it to be packaged in that traditional teachers lecturing, telling us what to do. And, I love that you use the term uncertainty. It's fascinating because that kind of goes with all mindfulness and not knowing. And my chapter there, it's fun to see all these connections with the different chapters. And the other thing, and I don't know, we only have a couple minutes and I'll throw this out and see what you think. The other thing I've noticed for my students is that some of them are very afraid to just struggle a little bit and spend a little time in not knowing, a little time in uncertainty. And I think because it doesn't feel like solid ground and it feels like they're struggling, there's not a clear way. And I've been thinking, how do I give them permission and freedom to, they experience it as struggling, is what then they talk about imposter syndrome, But I'm like, no, this is how you cure imposter syndrome, is you sit and you struggle and you sit in the uncertainty and you find your way through it yourself. I don't just hand you a little recipe. So I just would love to hear your thoughts on some of those.
For me, what your question brings up is, as a school, as an institution, as a leader, we're being asked to have so many answers, and to know how to get to the right answer. And collaborative-dialogic practices has certainly, for me, taught me that it's okay not to know, and then how do I convey that message to others. And I'll give you an example. I used to tell my staff, hey, I'm going to meet with this family, and I'm going to let them know what our stance is as a school. And then I would meet with the family, and as more information came about, or the conversation didn't go as I had initially planned, the outcome of that meeting would be different. And then I have to go back to my teachers and say, hey, sorry, I didn't let that family go this time because, and so forth. So today, I've learned not to predict what the meeting's going to be about. Today, I invite others into conversation, and we'll see where that goes. And so, yeah, it's so many of the kids would like an answer. My teachers would like an answer, right? So this is, we're connecting it back to uncertainty. Let's just find out together. And it's a very different approach than what I was trained to initially be as an administrator. And now it's how do I invite others into this process and into this this philosophical stance.
Another piece I would like to add, which I think is really important in our chapter, is what Richard shared about the financial struggles. We are not used to share that, and we are not used to share it with the teams we work with. But the availability of the school was there, and if he couldn't solve the financial situation, and he didn't share the financial situation with his parents, with his teachers, and with everybody at the school, I don't think the school would have been alive today. So wow. It's not only that he was brave enough to share it with them, he's brave enough to write it in the chapter for all of us, to include this in the way we make decisions about how we keep our projects alive.
Yeah.
A beautiful example, if we want the people we work with to be open and honest, we have to be open and honest with them.
Absolutely. Well, Richard and Sylvia, I want to thank you so much for sharing your journey and so many of the personal elements of it and your struggle in your chapter, because I think it's so important to be talking about this. And I think you just displayed how beautifully how these ideas can help in some of the most challenging times. So thank you both very, very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for giving us the opportunity to reflect upon it. If we didn't write this chapter, we wouldn't know all we know about our process.
Yep.
Yes, we learn from our writing and reading our writing at a later time. Thank you for mentioning that.
Thank you so much. So Sylvia, if you can keep your camera on, because she wrote 2 chapters, and we're going to invite Nyeka, and Luis is with us as well.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Wonderful.
So I want to thank all 3 of you for this incredible chapter of yours, describing how to use these ideas when consulting with, of all things, a construction company. So I'm telling you, this book covers so much of the human experience. But this was just an absolute eye-opening, delightful way to think about how these ideas can be used in a business context. So maybe you all could just share a little bit, a little summary of your chapter.
I think also, Diane, it highlights how companies themselves can become collaborative within and in their external work with their consumers or customers or clients.
Okay, so we would like to thank you, and this is becoming like all this connection is like a tide of continuous movement that we connect with each other. So thank you. And
So why don't we give them a little background of where we did the work we did? And we are so lucky that Luis is here because Luis is our partner in crime, but he's also our client. So it's great to have the client's voice to talk about how collaborative practices influence the work in an organization and in a business. So thank you, Luis, for joining us. So you and I will begin, and then Luis will join us.
yes, okay. So we will start describing this company. And Quiero Casa is a family business that, on top of doing real estate developments, includes in its mission the social, personal, and economic well-being of its personnel and the communities where they build.
In order to fulfill their mission, they created the Regenerative Development Department that invited us to train their staff and collaborative liaisons in city practices to foster conversations and relationships within the company and among the different stakeholders involved in the construction process. And that includes the business, the governments, and the community.
The stories we share in this chapter illustrate the way the principles of collaborative dialogic practices can provide the conversational methodology, as Luis Holguin refers to it, to put in practice the concept of collaborative capital links as means to recognize that each capital can achieve some of its interests and purposes by choosing to let others go.
The benefits manifest in better relationships with the key players within the company, the government, and the community. This leads to the possibility of developing successful planning, building and selling, and most importantly, it leads to positive relationships.
And last but not least, the stories in this chapter help us remember that engaging in collaboration and dialogue through the principles of capital links can offer an alternative approach to the traditionally patronizing practices in community work.
So, Luis, can you add your voice, please, from your
Of course.
experience with us?
Thank you for the space. I only want to tell everyone that collaborative practices are really useful in business. As many of the persons before has told, we are people, we are persons, not resumes. We are a lot more than a resume can tell. And the collaborative practices has been really important in my teams. I have like 5 teams in the company because they also allowed me to see that the staff can make a lot of good impacts in a lot of things, even when his studies and the experience that a resume can tell doesn't allow you to see that. So the collaborative practices have had an impact in the company to the outside with the communities in which we have developments, but also in the way we relate each other and the career plans for the staff. Many people from the team that Sylvia and Ñeka start introducing in the collaborative practices have developed a really interesting leadership in other teams of other activities, allow us to see that the collaborative practices are useful in all the business areas. Thank you.
And I would like to highlight with that your concept of capital links, that then we included collaborative practices to make it happen really bring something, the richness of understanding that you can achieve something if you're willing to let something go. And that takes us to a win-win-win stance. And I think that's been the key to the negotiations and to the way your company relates to the communities, not only for the better of your stakeholders, but also for the betterment of the communities. And that's really beautiful. So really congratulations to you for your wisdom and your boldness.
It's a way to make people that we have different interests.
Mm-hmm.
So if we allow the others to express what they think is the important part, we will discover that the others doesn't always see the things as we.
But also, Luis, I would say that we are very thankful because you help us understand your concepts that were not so easy to understand about capital links. And we have to really invest a lot of time and willing to understand what you were meaning and trying to make a connection with the collaborative dialogic language. So
could you define, because I'm guessing most people listening have no idea what these collaborative links are, and I think we need to define them.
So Luis, you created the concept, go. we will add the collaborative piece, but why don't you start with capital links, because it's your concept.
Oh, you're muted.
You're muted again. Come on.
open your mic, please.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Okay.
I make this concept in Spanish. I really fluent in my language, but in English, I will try to explain it really fast. As I was telling you, we think as capital always in money, but you have social capital, knowledge, many kind of capital, and the people with you have interactions put more value in different capitals. So if you learn to hear and to look for win-win negotiations between all these kind of capitals, in most of the time, you will have better scenarios for all the people involved. But Sylvia, in English, I believe you will be more efficient.
So after we learned from Luis this whole notion of how the exchange of capitals works if we place value in each other capitals, and if we're listening to what each person values, then we can put them together in a way that we will only survive if we are able to listen and understand that in order to win, we have to lose something. We cannot win them all. So when we heard that concept, Nyeka and I coined the concept of collaborative capital links, which is a way we bring collaborative practices to make capital links possible, because then the people, which are the collaborative liaisons in their case, are able to have the relational and the conversational skills to make those conversations possible, so the capital links can be exchanged and coexist together. You want to add something, Nyeka?
And I think in the examples of the stories that we share, it's a place where we can see how the collaborative, how the way the collaborative liaisons could listen to the others, and they could engage in a relationship where the ways they could face and resolve many situations that were not very easy and that were not very safe in many moments.
So I
But
guess
they have like a way of doing it through the way of listening and making their listener the expert in their story. And that was a way of engaging with these people and make possible many solutions that seems to be almost impossible.
and most important for us, we are just bringing stories that we didn't create them. We are really representing the voice of Luis' team, and the 5 stories we share in the chapter, it's their work. We are just a bridge to bring those stories to the collaborative community, but it's their work, they are their stories, and it's the way they're capable of bringing collaborative practices to everyday life in very difficult situations, sometimes life danger. There's a story that I think is my favorite, is the
Why
one
don't
of
you
the
share a
school.
little bit? Yeah.
The school story, which is I think is my favorite, and maybe the way we tape the stories from Luis's team, we just brought them to the community. So this is a story in one of the meetings that the liaisons were having with the community, which is the meetings they have in order to understand what the community needs. They heard that was a school that was in danger because there was something structurally that wasn't working. So the Quiero Casa team experts, the engineers, came and looked at the school, and they found that there was some problem in the stairs that they had to repair. So what they did is that they signaled those stairs that so the kids and the teachers will not use those stairs and will not use that section of the school because it was in danger. The construction was not safe. And 2 weeks later, we had the 2017 earthquake in Mexico City. So that part of the school collapsed. But fortunately, everybody was safe because they have done this signaling and nobody was there when the earthquake happened. So this was for us, this was an incredible story because we're talking about lives. We're talking at how when you collaborate with your community and you bring your resources to the community, you can really save lives. So, of course, everybody was safe. The name of the story in the chapter is Nobody Was Hurt. And then after the earthquake, there was a whole movement that a lot of the constructions were shut down in the neighborhood. But the neighbors went to the municipality and asked for the Quiero Casa buildings to continue the construction. That was a way they were showing the gratitude of how Quiero Casa supported them and saved their lives. And this is just one of the many stories of the many ways this company involves itself in the community and they work together. Maybe this is our version of the story. Luis has a much better version. Luis, you had an update of this version of this story, right? Something else is happening in this community at this moment.
Well, the problem between the neighbors and the construction workers still alive, and we still having a great relationship. So we are having not any problem in our construction. So it's great. But part of the importance of hearing the community is that in the business, a lot of time, we don't believe when the others tell us that there's a real problem. So part of the collaborative practices greatness is that allow us to believe in what the other people around are seeing, so we can build solutions together.
And, we're just about out of time here, but I want to just, I'll add a comment, maybe I'll leave a little time for Harlene too, is I think what was so beautiful about this chapter is to have this vision of how a business like a construction company, it was actually moving to read how you went and talked to the neighbors and the community about what you're building and how it's going to affect their lives. And here in the States, it is so combative and legalistic, and everyone's from the beginning, it is set up. I mean, you can go to community hall, the city hall, and complain, and everyone's arguing. And I was just thinking, wow, what would it be like to live in a society where this is how businesses operated in the community? It's really like, would be life-changing. And it's just even reminding me a little bit of the work of the Czech team in the climate activism. This type of community work, which we're going to continue talking about what's going on in Brazil in just a minute here, it really is transforming societies in beautiful, beautiful ways. So I just thank you all for sharing this work and this incredible vision you have for what a company, what a business, what a corporation can be. And I think at this time in history, it's, I'll just say, refreshing. Harlene?
Yes, so Diane, thank you for highlighting that, because I really want to highlight that their chapter is about relationships and the relationships that the company and its employees made with citizens and leaders of the community. And that's what it's built on.
Mm-hmm. There's a theme today, isn't there?
Yeah, theme of relationships, but it wasn't like, you know, they just go in and we're going to build this 7-story apartment building, whether you like it or not, in your community. But this is what we plan to do, and we want to talk with you about it. So they really invited the expertise of the community members on their own community. Yeah. What would work, what wouldn't work, what they wanted. Yeah. And the whole thing about the school, if I'm not remembering incorrectly, I think that the company volunteered to take a look at the steps in the school. It wasn't like they put in a bid to do this. They volunteered. If you're concerned about the steps in the school, we'll look at them.
Wow, amazing.
And that's giving up something.
Mm-hmm. But they got a lot back in return.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you. This was wonderful, and it's a wonderful chapter, and we appreciate the three of you offering it so much.
Thank you so, so much.
Okay, so now we're moving from Mexico to Brazil and Argentina, right?
Absolutely. Adela and Marlene, if you could turn on your cameras. Let's see, Marlene? Ask her to start her video. Ask her to unmute. Aha, there she is. Lovely.
Oh, hello.
Welcome.
Hello, I am here. Good afternoon to everybody. How are you, Adele? Adela?
Adela? Is Adela logged in possibly as Olivia? No. Adela is, hold on, I'm going to find Adela. I'm going to.
Okay.
There's Adela. Coming.
Adela? Let me see if...
There you are. Lovely.
Okay.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello.
To each of you.
I'm afraid my partner wasn't here. Oh, God.
So please go ahead and tell us about your chapter.
Okay. First of all, we want to thank you to be invited to write this chapter. So let me introduce us for the whole audience, because some knows us and others. But Marilene is from Brazil and I am from Argentina. And we have a long story of meetings along the path of our lives, looking for ways to be more helpful, useful to people's suffering. So we finally met like 30 years ago in the field of family therapy, meetings, etc., etc. But we started our friendship in the first ICCP meeting in Guadalajara. So I let you know, Harlene, you help us to go to Tlaquepaque and have a lot of fun together. I think it was 1996. But and so from then on, we kept meeting in different places and found basically a common topic among ourselves, which was to go from the individual to broader systems, and being concerned how to reach people living under social and economic vulnerabilities, since our countries have a long, big populations living on those conditions. So, and finally, we started to be more connected with the ICCP program, because I think Marilene was the first one in the South America to run one of those programs. And I think I was the second, but we have been working together. And also we met in the field of community therapy that was created by a Brazilian. So I invite Marilene if she wants to add something about our presentation and to start our sharing our chapter to you.
Thank you, Adela. I'd like you to begin. Thank Harlene and Diane to the honorable invitation to be part of this book. Thank you so much for the trust. It is a pleasure to stay here to introduce with Adela our chapter named Community in Conversation, Generating Collaborative and Dialogical Conversations in Community Contexts. This chapter has as a proposal to present the integrative community therapy, you name it ICT, a social and political practice that was born in Brazil to generate collaborative, dialogical, community conversational space as a practice to exchange experience and knowledge among people, favoring social transformation, social inclusion, and respect of difference through collaboration and dialogue. Our chapters began present a short historical of ICT practice since its beginnings in the decade of 1980, following its development until the pandemic era, when ICT began to be offered virtually. We emphasize how the ICT proposed by Adalberto Barreto has been a successful way of responding to suffering of people living in extreme social, economic, and housing vulnerability, far away from mental health centers and good conditions of education, and especially during the social isolation of pandemic times. We highlight the plurality of discourses ICT put together, science and culture, theory and practice, folk and ancestral wisdom, besides the voices of ethical traditions. Welcome the polysemy, the community in conversation invited by ICT, creates an enriched context with many borders to open possibilities and generate creative ways of overcoming conflicts and building social network to support people in their challengeable crises. The ICT as a collective practice fosters the activation of the therapeutic ability of the group itself by helping the person to discover the human and contextual implications of the condition of suffering in their lives. ICT is a practice in action that was proposed in response to the demand from the community. It honors the folk wisdom and cultural values, democratizing the knowledge, as Adalberto Barreto says. We presented the theoretical frameworks that give some guidelines to its practice. Special emphasis we do to the dialogical proposal for action and reflection of the Brazilian educator Paulo Freire. After a brief consideration of the theoretical orientation, we described the methodology of ICT, organized in 5 stages: welcome, choose of a theme of conversation, contextualizing this time, theme, harvest of learnerships and resources of community, and finally, closing rituals. Adela and I emphasize the narrative and collaborative dialogical practice, how enrich ICT practice. This is the main proposal of our chapter, and Adela will do some considerations about this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Marilene. Besides the influence that Adalberto acknowledges as inspirational, mentioned by Marilene, we look at ICT as a dialogical practice in community. It offers a form of interaction in which each participant feels heard and responded. It doesn't matter how many people are they, it may be many, the structure helps people to be heard and be able to talk.
Could you
Being a good,
can I just pause you a little bit?
Yeah.
Maybe you could just share for the audience who hasn't been able to read your chapter, just to, to give them just a general picture of what this would look like, because you're working with, very impoverished communities, and how do you bring them into these groups to have dialogue? Just because not everyone has the picture, I think.
Maybe I hear a bit how this started. In the very beginning, it started because Adalberto Barreto was working with in a favela. Favela is a very poor community, and so he was receiving referrals from that community in the university where he had service. But there were so many that he decided to go to the favela itself. But when he arrived, there was 30 people waiting for him. So he said, well, how can I, so they put all together under a tree to talk. So, so us in collaborative practices, the practice came before, and later came, the conceptualization. So in that experience, he realized that people in the community could respond to the people were sharing much more warm, with affection to people and their problems, because they knew, for instance, if a woman was talking about her child in drugs, or if someone had been killed, or violence, among the community, they have the problems, but also have the resources. So the community would, part of the talk, this community talk, is first of all some problems that are chosen and the community votes one of the problems. But after the community is asked who have had a problem similar to this and what did they do to go on to solve it? And if they could not solve it, well, how did they manage to go on life? So lots of resources are come as a response. So one of the main things that are very, very interesting for us is what is the effect of one person talking about their suffering and the whole group of people listening. We as therapists give so much importance that one person is listening to you because you have this delicate problem and you keep it secret. No, it's a human problem. So people, when they are speak in front of the community, feel such human. You were talking about humanity. Feels so human in terms that he or she is a member of a group alone. So it's interesting because we have been doing this in different settings, not just, let's say, people living under vulnerable social and economic conditions. And we all come out of these meetings enriched, even the one that works as a therapist or facilitator, as we prefer to call it. Because one thing that we wanted to, and we are happy to share this work in the collaborative and dialogical field, because even though if Adalberto didn't name it, he speaks about one of the most important things is how you create an atmosphere where people are comfortable. So is how to be a good host in our words. And so how we keep our language the same as the community language, not to talk about in an expert language that we ourselves understand, but not the people. And how do we respect the values and diversity and cultures and religions, how we are open to that. But in order for the community to be able to talk, he presents a group of guidelines, very simple: to speak my position, to be silent while another one is talking, not to give him advice, not to judge, not to interpret. So in a different way, the values and dialogic practices we appreciate and we sustain, well, are the same, although it seems more instructive. But so we have found beautiful and also the work with the people, not talk about, right? Mm-hmm. The witness practice and the witness thinking. So I personally have found that my collaborative and dialogic praxis had been enriched by this experience of doing this dialogic practice in community. I worked with 150 people once, and it was the same. And Marilene had worked with 1,000 group of policemen, and it's the same. And you say, wow, this is something why we have been keeping this privacy when it is related to our pains. Yeah. When we need more people, when we are in suffering, we don't need to be alone. We have this crisis in the present times. Yes. I don't know if I answered your question.
And thank you both. We're just about out of time here, and maybe Harlene, do you want to wrap this up?
Well, I hear the political aspect and what they're talking about, and I think that's something that's been running through all of the stories, all of the chapters, the potential for political and social change in the work that people are doing. And again, using the resources of the people that you're working with. And Adela's and Marlene's use of the term facilitator rather than a more professional term like whatever that might be, therapist or judge or lawyer or principal or teacher. But they're facilitating, helping create a space and a process for relationships and conversations that have the potential for possibilities to emerge from what people are offering. So thank you, Adela and Marlene, very much. It's very impressive work. And thank you for writing your chapter.
Okay. Thank you, Adela, Diane. And I only think more. All this is done with music and dance. So it's a very, very, very joyful way to talk about hard things. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you very much to, that allows us to expand this and to enrich our community with it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For everything.
And Diane.
For bringing back the meeting, the memories of the meeting in Guadalajara.
Thank you both so much. Just a beautiful example of how to do great community work. So next, though, we are going to invite up Dan and Sally from Canada, Calgary. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you for having us.
And I guess we should say, Harlene, in both our first book, Collaborative Therapy, and this book, Collaborative-Dialogic Practice, we have invited Dan and Sally to close the book, both books, on a chapter of how this affects us, how to live these ideas in our personal life. And it is such a precious contribution. We're so thankful that you've taken this on twice for us. And so just please tell everyone a little bit about your chapter.
Okay, thanks. The title of our chapter is Everyday Living as Inspiration for Collaborative Practices. And I think you're right, Diane. I mean, it just feels like everything that we've already heard last week and this week is contained, or we were able to write about it because everybody who's presented are near and dear to us, and we've learned so much from them. So, but we put it together in our own way.
So thanks for allowing us space to be in the books and to be on this telecast today. We also want to thank all the technical people and the translators who are doing this as well. I think, as Sheila said, my technical skills are kind of at the level of flip phones, so I really need to have this kind of help. So our chapter in this book, this new book, is kind of a continuation, or it was kind of foreshadowed in the first book. We said at the end of that chapter that we felt that collaborative practices could be connected more with our personal lives and with global movements. And so we just kind of left that chapter with that kind of final statement. And so this chapter in this book allowed us to go into a little more detail about that.
And so we, I think, outlined and we recounted different practices were the ones that fit for us and that were daily in nature and related to therapy, but didn't necessarily come from therapy and therapeutic theory.
So Harlene has helped the translation from therapy to practice, moving from the expert to in the therapy room to practices more broadly understood. We'd like to extend this to life in general. We think that these kinds of ways of being with people that we talk about as collaborative practice really are grounded in everyday life, and people can understand them because parts of collaborative practices are in what we do every day across the globe.
In our chapter, we wrote that our primary focus was to discuss how we see collaborative practice as inspired in and from the life-giving and loving practices evidenced in everyday life as much as it does come from theory and philosophy, if not more.
We gave a couple examples in our chapter about how these ideas played out in our own lives and our own development in our earlier years. And we both had experiences in therapy and in teaching where we found ourselves going toward those ideas that fit for us as persons, rather than some kind of theoretical, interesting thing where we adapted ourselves to them. So we needed to have practices that would fit for us as people as we were, rather than finding a therapy and then trying to adapt ourselves to the therapeutic strategies.
So this was a nice opportunity for us to put forward some ideas that we don't usually see in the textbooks. And one of them that we're pretty proud of and live by is that being loving can be considered too ordinary or not professional enough. And so we worry about that, but only to a little bit of a degree.
We resonate with the congruence that Harlene talks about between the philosophical stance of collaborative work and the everyday practices we engage in that are life-giving and loving. So we really see this as kind of, Harlene's kind of giving some space or some grounding or some justification for behaving in ways that all of us know are life-giving practices. So it's kind of a nice professional grounding, if you will, of things that we think are commonsensical and valuable. So following up with from Marilene and Adela, seemed particularly appropriate because they're emphasizing the values, the resources, what people already know, what people already can do. And so that's front and center. And the political, I would say the political implications of our chapter is that we're really challenging the primacy of the expert. We're really saying experts are fine, they have some things they can add, but it's just one way of doing it. And we really need to elevate, people's everyday experiences to that same level. And the experts don't have a corner on the market of what is good for people.
Maybe one last way we could reiterate this is that real life and collaborative practices form a dialectic. They borrow from each other and they give back. Thanks.
Thank you, each of you, very much. Wow, Diane, this is just, in a way, we've come full circle, but we are also following a thread. The importance of relationships, the importance of acknowledging the humanness of the other person, being human ourselves, being respectful.
And I love Dan and Sally's work on this topic, because I don't think you can actually do this work well unless it becomes your way of being in and out of session. I don't know. It's more than a philosophical shift, Harlene. It is a mindset, you've said is better, but it's this way of just seeing other humans. And it's not like you turn on being collaborative for clients and then you can just turn it off. There is this full shift. I don't know. Dan and Sally, am I saying it right? Can you better words to that?
I think that
values. I think value is the word that Luis from Mexico City used in terms of his work in the community.
Now the appeal of collaborative work for us has been that it's so resonant with who we are as people. We didn't need to kind of, in a way, we kind of just felt at home with these ideas. We didn't like say, oh, I got to work really hard. I got to spend 3 years of intensive supervision and all kinds of guidance. In some ways, it felt so commonsensical. It almost felt like, well, how could you do it any other way? So it was that resonant with us that gave a I think, the kind of power or value that we had for it. So I don't know if that's for everybody, but for us, it certainly seemed just so part of our fabric.
And part of every role or relationship we've been in, kind of like as our colleagues have been talking about so far this morning, that relationship piece, that interpersonal acknowledgement and appreciation of one another. It doesn't matter the location. And people have talked about it in different disciplines and different professional endeavors. So that's, yeah. So mindset is a good word, a way of being.
And if you're going to stretch these ideas into practice venues far and wide, organizations, hospitals, community centers, libraries, if you start stretching it into the community, I think the only respectful approach is to kind of value what the community already knows. And so you fit with them. You become a partner to what they're doing, rather than they have to adapt to your language and all the stuff that you present as a professional. It's really incumbent upon us to learn their language. And so I think that going into the community, finding these other practice locations, it demands that we become resonant with these folks if we're going to be successful. So I think it's a good move. I think collaborative work is natural to be used in other places outside the therapy room.
So again, thank you, Sally and Dan, for your contribution. And you've already given me an idea for something in the future.
maybe a third book. How about that, Harlene?
I'm thinking about it.
I love it. I love it.
So Diane, we still have 2 chapters that the authors were not able to be here this Saturday or last Saturday. And we have some brief video clips that we can share.
Okay. So, well, thank you so much, Dan and Sally. And, I'm just going to briefly share, because I got 1 minute left on their timer. I have been timing the whole thing, but they're gone. But, an example I give my students is I give them an assignment to go into the community, and when they're having just everyday relationships, try to connect with folks. And I often suggest the grocery store clerk to have a moment where you recognize their humanity. And it is amazing, you can tell that they are just treated like a machine themselves, right? And when you ask, about, what's it like to stand there all day? Or is it, did I get lucky? You just talk about how they're experiencing their daily life. It is very humanizing for them and for yourself. And it really, these types of relationships with total strangers in our work life, with the plumber who comes to fix the faucet, it really cannot be overstated, the value both for what what it brings to others and also to our own lives. So I just think the work that you all talk about is just so beautiful. So thank you. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Well, I think maybe we'll transition to another one of our Canadian authors with that. And so Jan DeFer wrote a chapter in our book on using these ideas in research. So we're going to go ahead and share her introduction of her chapter.
My name is Dr. Jan DeFer. I'm an associate professor in the Faculty of Education at the University of Winnipeg. And I want to begin by expressing my gratitude to the editors, to Harlene and Diane, for the chance to be part of this book and this very special book celebration. Where I come from, it is customary to begin formal gatherings with acknowledgements. So this is my land acknowledgement for our gathering today. I live and work in the territories of the Anishinaabe, Nahiawak, Ojibwe, Dakota, Dene, and Métis peoples. in Treaty 1 territory, colonially known as Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. Land acknowledgements remind settlers like myself of the tremendous debt we owe and the obligation we have to participate meaningfully in decolonial reparations. I should acknowledge also that the research referred to in my chapter was funded by a University of Winnipeg partnership grant and major research grant. I opened my chapter with Harlene Anderson's teaching that the collaborative-dialogic approach is a way of being with rather than a system for doing. But qualitative research methodologies, in contrast, offer systems for doing. So my chapter asks and answers two questions. First one, how could a collaborative dialogic way of being function as a legitimate and generative approach to qualitative research? And second, what changes when researchers bring a collaborative dialogic orientation to their qualitative research work? I discuss these questions with reference to two of my current action research projects, both set within a Canadian community health center. The first project, to our surprise, became the springboard for the second project, which is actually still underway. So I want to close this virtual abstract with these words from my chapter. Dialogic inquiry reflects a shift in logic, moving from a mechanical style of thought to what John Schotter called, and I quote, a relational, contextualizing, or ecological manner. In other words, an ecologic, end of quote. Because dialogic process is intricately bound to the developing circumstances where it is produced, it cannot be picked up and rolled out elsewhere. Collaborative dialogic ways of being shift qualitative research from a methodologically driven practice to a more reciprocal, unrepeatable, context-dependent undertaking.
So, and I think Jan's chapter is going to be inspirational for a lot of graduate students in terms of just thinking of ways to engage research that focus on that relationship, that are reciprocal, and that often, as Jen talked about in the chapter, lead to real world action and change. I don't know if you want to say anything else, Harlene.
Well, I was thinking, hopefully that some practitioners who are listening will begin to think of their practice in terms of research as part of everyday practice, how to step back and be reflective, to think about your practice, what's working, what's not working, why does something appeal to you, why does it not appeal to you, what does it allow you to do, what does it not allow you to do, and that in terms of stepping back and reflecting on your practice, that you can then reflexively take what you are learning forward into your everyday practice as you take the next steps.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a beautiful way to do research. Absolutely. Well, I know we're short on time, so we're gonna just spend a couple minutes here. And our last chapter to talk about is a chapter from a group of professionals in China who worked with Harlene as their consultant to bring collaborative ideas to an IT company. So we'll go ahead and hear from our team in China.
My name is Jakub Ceny. I'm a teacher in Communication University of China. And also, I'm one of the author of this chapter 13. I will briefly summarize the chapter. This chapter describes how we apply collaborative dialogue in an IT company in China. We have already worked on it for nearly 10 years. Because collaborative dialogue philosophy is so fit of the company's culture. So I think it's a very success case of applying collaborative dialogue in company. And we also described how we apply collaborative dialogue in job competition, team building, leadership development, and many other functions of the company. Yeah, it's just a very short summary. And my colleague, Dolly and Yungo will detailed about this chapter.
Okay. And just so everyone knows, there will be a web page with all of these abstracts and all of these conversations posted, and it'll all be on YouTube, so you will get to hear more from them. But Harlene, do you just want to say a quick word about the team in China, since you work so closely with them?
Well, I think how the chapter came to be is really interesting, because I was landing at the airport in Beijing and Haibo was meeting me. And so on the drive back into the city, I just happened to ask him, I said, oh, how is the work with the company going? We've referred to it as the company. And he began telling me, and he said, well, as a matter of fact, at least 12 of them will be in the training tomorrow. And I said, oh, really? And my mind started going like this. And I thought, I wonder if I could have a conversation with them about this work in their company and the influence and what they're doing and how they're doing and what's next. And he said, I'll ask. So he contacts me later and he said, yes. Everyone says yes. And the woman in the top right of your screen is Dolly. She's the HR director of the company. And she happened to attend a training, a psychology training that Haibo was doing at a university. And she got very interested in his talking about collaborative work. And she goes back to her company, an IT company, a very large company in Beijing. And she started talking to some of the department managers about what she was learning. And they decided, well, why don't we invite him? They invited Haibo to come. So he came and talked with all of them very informally, just to meet them and to tell them a little bit about his work. And then he began doing training with the managers and using reflecting processes, having them basically learn with and from each other. And then at the training that I was doing, I said, well, I would like to invite Dolly, because she was the first one to talk with Haibo. I would like to invite Dolly and Haibo to come sit in the center of the room and just have a conversation with me about how this all got started. And then as they mentioned other people who happened to be there, I would invite them into the conversation. So we had what I call a collective storytelling about the company and about the growth of collaborative dialogic practices within the company. And it's just amazing, because it's the whole company is now organized this way, and the owner of the company is very supportive and pays for a lot of training for the company and for people to go to workshops. So it's just amazing. It's kind of like you just begin informally kind of sharing your work, trying to be as natural and spontaneous as one can be. And you never know what's going to happen, what's going to come from a conversation. And so the chapter will tell a lot more about the story of the work in that company.
Yeah, it's really beautiful, and it just basically it's how they talk about problems and resolve problems. So it's a nice little model, sort of, so to speak, but I think it's they organize their conversations around the I think it's the four W's. And it's a great little chapter when you're working, in any organizational context.
And even how they changed the way they promoted people.
Mm-hmm. Wow, yeah, it's incredible.
It's incredible. They call it a competition, but it's not exactly a competition in the way that we might use the word in English.
Yeah.
That was the translation.
We just have a few minutes left here. Do we want to take some questions and maybe invite our panelists who are still with us?
Back to the chat. Yeah, let's invite the panelists. Maybe.
Yeah, anyone panelists who have been speaking today, if you're still with us, and you can welcome to turn on your camera. And especially if you found a question that was related to your talk, we invite you to go ahead and respond. Hello. Hi, Nick. I was getting worried that that it wasn't possible for folks to respond. And if anyone has a question, if you could maybe repost it here, and we'll try to respond. Okay. Ooh, wow, these are long. Okay. Let's see. Is Jakub still with us? Yeah, Jakub, but if you're still there, we have a question for you. Oh, there you are. Yes, there's a question here. How does this is from Saliha, who wrote the chapter on politics in Collaborative Dialogue. How does this stance of mutual care shift you in the way you live your life? If you could speak a little more to that. Kind of picks up on Dan and Sally's theme.
So only two of us left here, as Jakub has already had to leave. Let's try to answer the question. I think the emphasis we put on mutuality and mutual care. I think we're just trying to implement it in not just in our work or our engagement with activism. I think it's becoming a part of our lives in general. So I wouldn't even talk about the effect of it, rather becoming a part of how we try to live our lives.
Well, there's another question right next to this, so I'll pose it to you since your cameras and mics are on. They're also asking you, how does your work in climate activism affect your work with clients in mental health? Do you see it shift you as a clinician in any way, or inform your work as a clinician in any way?
Yeah, definitely. It totally influences our practice, or at least mine, if I should speak for myself. And I think like being more aware and acknowledge the importance of all of these topics allow me to embrace them more in the practice and be more attentive to them when the clients bring them up and when they start speaking about them, so I can engage more curiosity about what this brings to their lives and how does that create a resource for them to that we can also connect to the therapeutic process, or to sort of invite this resource in acknowledgement and presence with them when they are struggling or experiencing difficulties. So it's been very, very important for me to this reconnection to activism in the therapeutic practice.
Yeah, and I think it's something that all of us are going to be talking about more in therapy rooms, I think, going forward. Absolutely.
Problems and the agency over it.
And it sounds, what both of you are saying is that it begins to influence you in kind of a natural and spontaneous way. That you're not doing something purposely different. You're just naturally doing it different because your own mindset has shifted some. My words for your words. So Diane, then there's another one about schools. And to Sylvia and Richard, how do you bring resistant parents into collaborative relationship building?
So one of the things that we do at school is we like to incorporate as many voices as possible into all our processes. So one of them is simply by inviting them into conversation. And we do that in multiple ways. Obviously, real life situations at school give us that opportunity, right? When something happens in a classroom or a situation arises, we invite the parents in. But there's other ways too, focusing on our parent-teacher organization and using that as a way to talk about some of these concepts and ideas. We've created Sylvia and Yeka during the pandemic helped us organize a parent group where the parents had an opportunity to just talk and bring to mind some of their thoughts and ideas. We have, of course, we have a wellness and counseling team that not only works with the kids, but also works with the parents and the entire family unit. So supporting not just what's happening with the students at school, but also what's happening sometimes at home. So those are some of the ways that we try to build this sense of community. So looking at school as not just simply a student-teacher relationship or staff and kids, but looking at us as a family where we invite everyone to participate in the way that they feel comfortable, and obviously encouraging them to grow with us along the process of working together to help their kids.
And I'm assuming just parents having their voices heard and responded to. I mean, obviously you cannot do what every parent wants, because I don't know, every parent wants, there's a whole spectrum of what parents want. But I think it's just creating that process, allowing it to happen in a respectful way is what works.
And I think also as a school, we invite feedback from our parents. We invite them into conversation, and then also finding a way to help them feel like they've been heard, right? We like to say Xavier should be a place where we all feel safe to speak our minds and to share, no matter how difficult the conversation may be, that this is a place for us to express ourselves. So when we invite them to do that, then we also have to be responsive to that and acknowledge it, and where possible to make a shift or to do be open to doing something different. Right. So that's one of the things about inviting the parents into that conversation is we have to be able to speak their language as well. It's not just acknowledging that Xavier is a transformational experience. It has to go both ways. We have to also function in a society where school is seen in a particular way, where there are certain expectations, where we have to speak the language of credits and diplomas and so forth. So managing both worlds, it's a difficult challenge, but it goes in both directions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's another question here about taking this work more into the mainstream, and so can you just speak a little bit about that?
A lot of this work just seems very logical, right? And it makes sense when we make some of these changes, like, oh, why doesn't everyone else do it? And I will share with you, to be honest, the challenge, like just doing it in one school is incredibly challenging. So seeing how to spread this elsewhere, just the concept, the idea seems overwhelming, right? Because there are so many it's just such a complex process that we're slowly trying to figure it out and developing some of these ideas. So I think in order for us to really be able to spread some of our methodologies and approaches, we're still trying to figure them out as we go along, right? How do we apply collaborative dialogic processes to our discipline, for example, or to leadership in a school setting? I mean, there's just so many different topics that come along the way. Writing this chapter sort of has led me to think perhaps writing some more about these experiences and sharing some more. Maybe that's the way that makes it manageable.
Yeah, and I also think there's Sylvia, hello. I know you're hello, translator, back to panelists, your sound is off.
We can't hear you.
Yeah. Let's see. Oh, wait, you know, wait, she's in the hold on. Well, and as I'm getting Sylvia back, try speaking now, Sylvia.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. The first thing, Catalina, could you translate it to Spanish while I speak in English? Because I was translating, and so now can you translate back? Sorry, at some point, Catalina and I were both translating at the same time because we couldn't coordinate well enough, but I think now we are back. So please, Catalina, could you translate into Spanish? And then I'll go back to help you translate. My first reaction was with the word resistant. My first reaction would be, how can I reconceptualize the way I describe what the parent is trying to say? Because if I get stuck in the word resistant, it will create for me a very different way of relating to that person. So that would be the first thing that I will start at least conceptualizing in my head. How can I listen to this parent in a way that I don't experience the resistance, or I can describe the behavior in a different way? And that will allow me to begin the conversation in a different place. In terms of bringing into the mainstream, I think we've been working in many schools for many years in bringing dialogue to classrooms. And it's a very difficult challenge, but it's a very simple one at the same time if you begin where the school is. If you begin by listening to what the school is doing, what is this all about, and you slowly move with them and design with them the small possibilities for change. If you are too ambitious, you will move too fast and it won't work. But if you listen to where the school is and you start creating together with the staff and the school community small changes, maybe there's a way to start.
Yeah, I think that's so, because as I was listening to Richard and you just now, I was just thinking how every school is truly a very complex culture in and of itself. And that it's not like you're going to take what Richard's doing, and just plop it into another, like it's a method that you're going to just transfer someplace else. It's exactly what Sylvia is saying here. It's starting with the conversations with the people in this culture, this school, it's a huge extended family in some ways, and listening there, because it's going to look very different in each school. Mm. And I think realizing the shape that it takes.
And I would add not to be naive about collaborative practices and respect their complexity.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I would underscore that, Sylvia, because it is often more complex than it appears, or it appears often less complex than it is, because the challenge is making the mindset shift.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be able to truly, sincerely believe in and value certain assumptions about life in terms of who you are as a person, the people you work with, what you do together, and how you do it together. It's a huge mindset shift, and that's the beginning. And that's where some have used the language of value or belief. So, Diane, you want to say something about the book? It's available on Amazon. Last Saturday, my husband ordered one, and it came first thing Monday morning. And
do you have your hands on it? I naively thought, I said, no, Routledge will send me my copy this week, and they haven't. So Harlene actually has it, and I regret not buying it and trusting that it'll get sent to me. But it is available.
I'll hold it up so that you can see it.
Yeah, awesome, beautiful. I'm going to order mine today.
And the cover is once again Sylvia London's sister, Sarah London, a Mexico artist. We took the cover image from one of her paintings, which is in her Entrande Red series, which means networking.
Love it. Love it. Yes. And she did our last cover as well. And it's available on Routledge and also on Amazon. And I believe that is my niece, Audrey Gehart, has put it in the chat. She's decided to be an MFT. And if you're interested in the continuing education hours, they are available for $15. You will get the link to all of that tomorrow. I need to post this video and count the exact number of hours for all of this, but that will be available next week. And you will find this recording also freely available on my YouTube channel, Diane Gehart, Ph.D. There might be an R in that somewhere, but just Diane Gehart, Collaborative Practices, and you should find this. Also to replay in terms of just getting access to this. And if you missed last week's symposium as well, it will be freely available. And the same web page where you found to register for this event, we will have more resources in terms of, we'll be putting these virtual abstracts and the conversations up, so you can just go look at each chapter and get the snippet from this symposium quickly and easily. And for all you academics and grad students, all of the APA 7th edition references are typed out and ready to cut and paste into your papers. So yeah, Harlene.
And then there's the code for the discount. If you decide you want to order the book directly from Routledge, the publisher, they're offering a modest code. They're offering a code for a modest discount.
Yep. I will be looking for that real quickly here. Okay, and I will be putting this is only available for Routledge books.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll be putting that into the chat. Okay.
So, Diane, thank you for all of your technical skills and know-how. And Audrey, thank you. And thank our translators. We have 3 from the Chinese team. They're translating, and they are also recording it in Chinese. And they will be making it available to this huge community of learners in China that they have an online learning program with. And then also thank Catalina El-Hodre, who at the 11th hour, literally last night, agreed to do the Spanish translation. And Sylvia, I hear that you stepped in and helped out some, so thank you.
Thank you. Well, Harlene, this wasn't maybe you and I can just take a moment to reflect on this symposium. I am I've really enjoyed this so much, and I've really been just astounded once again in terms of, you and I spent many hours on editing all of these chapters back and forth in dialogue with the authors digitally on paper. But to hear all these voices and to have these conversations, it made the themes become much clearer. Again, dialogue, conversation helps us understand ourselves, our world, our experience in such so many ways. And I certainly from today, I think the theme of relationship, I mean, just look at the different contexts, climate activism, university classrooms, schools during the pandemic, impoverished communities, in Brazil, it just, everyday life, the grocery store checkout line, just the number of ways, that this work, what it shifts so much of what we heard today is the relationship, a humanizing relationship. It just really stood out to me. Maybe you want to wrap this up?
It really does stand out, and it runs through all the chapters that we heard about today, as well as the others that we heard about last Saturday. And I am so impressed with the authors' enthusiasm for their work and their creativity, because this shows that it's not a method. It's not a formula that you respond to what is in front of you. And I think that is so evident in all of the chapters. So once again, I cannot express enough gratitude to everyone who joined us today, and for the participants for being here with us, for your interest and for your comments and your questions on the chat. And if there's some that are just still pressing that we have not addressed, I know that there are some for sure, just email either me or Diane, and we will put you in contact with the authors directly, or we will try to answer your question or respond to your comment ourselves.
We do have a question about a Spanish translation of the book. And you want to say?
Well, we have had inquiries about that. So we have some people who are interested in translating it. If there's someone on the call today or on the, whatever we call this, Zooming today, who's interested in translating it and knows a company, let us know.
But we have one request, and you can contact us and we'll connect you with Routledge Publications, and they will hopefully we'll get a translation out in the very near future is our hope.
Yeah, a company in Argentina has inquired about translating it to Spanish.
Okay. Thank you.
From years ago, send that question to me. The one you posed to Ken Gergen years ago.
Thank you. Well, thank you, everyone. I think we've got most of these, I hope, questions here. And
Good Saturday afternoon. Have a good Saturday evening, or a good sleep, or a good Sunday if it's already Sunday, like it is in the Asian countries.
Absolutely. And we just hope we've inspired you and your work, both professionally and also in your personal life. And yeah, so be well, everyone, and take care.
Bye-bye. Thanks again.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, and thanks, everyone, for joining us. Okay, we're going to be ending. And oh, Della, hello. Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye. I'm saying bye in person.
Thank you. You look so beautiful today, Adela.
Thank you, Harlene.
As always, I should add.
So you look also. I mean, it's after so much time that we have not seen each other. I said, "Wow, we are doing well."
Absolutely.
Thanks, Diane, for your work in our editing. I imagine how much you have suffered.
Oh, please. Oh, no. Be well.
Okay.
Take care,
See
everyone.
you.
Okay, bye-bye. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Kevin. Thank you.